Darkcast Network, indie pods with a dark side. Hello and welcome back to Fuck That. Sorry for the week off. Well, technically I'm a bi-weekly podcast, although I have been trying to produce episodes weekly, but I did get really sick for a week. I thought I might have had the bubonic plague for a second there, so I missed you all as much as I'm sure that you all have missed me. One quick thing before I jump into the episode, there are a lot of episodes that are backlogged and archived. I think there's about 10 right now, and I have one full-length bonus episode currently, as well as one more that I'm recording after this, and then two more that I'm going to be doing in February. So if you're looking for that kind of bonus content, Patreon, F that pod. So a couple of weeks ago, I posted a poll on Instagram. If you don't follow me on social media, check out my handles there in my show notes. I do a lot of interactive Q&As there to get listener feedback. So I asked people what kind of cases they wanted to hear. And I had a decent amount of people say that they wanted to hear more cases that involved the paranormal in some way. This is a true crime podcast, and I'm not sure how receptive most of my audience would be to that. I would be totally down to do that. So I figured I'd meet somewhere in the middle and kind of soft launch into a paranormal episode. So this week, I'm going to be covering the very checkered history of the Cecil Hotel, where there's going to be a lot of crimes that take place here, but I'm also going to bring in the superstition surrounding the Cecil Hotel. And if I get some solid feedback and people like paranormal cases, then maybe I'll pepper some in more frequently. All right, here we go. Shit's about to get real weird. This week, we're checking into the Cecil Hotel, a place where normal checks out the moment you check in. Born in the glitz and glam of the 1920s, located in the heart of Skid Row, this hotel quickly turned into the VIP lounge for the strange and sinister. The Cecil Hotel, labeled Hotel Suicide by its guests, opened its doors during the formal opening, which took place on December 20th of 1924. The hotel initially saw success, and it remained a 5-star destination until the Great Depression. Hotelier William Banks Hammer wanted to seize the need for mid-priced quality hotels in downtown, which was a very ideal location at the time, and his ambition materialized as a 14-story building. They skipped the 13th floor because they were superstitious. Ambitiously named after London's high-end Cecil Hotel located along River Thames. On the day of its opening night was advertised in the Los Angeles Times. 300 rooms were offered for $1.50 a night, and these rooms offered communal showers and baths. 200 rooms were offered that had a private toilet for $2 a night, and 200 rooms for $2.50 got you a private toilet and bath. And this was something that people really wanted. It was downtown, it was convenient, it was near train stations, close to restaurants, theaters, hospitals, and they offered discounted rates for long-term rentals. So initially, the Cecil Hotel was really successful. The clientele of the hotel was a really solid mix of both middle-class tourists as well as permanent residents. Not long after the seemingly promising hotel opening, tragedy struck. In January of 1927, Percy Ormond Cook, a former real estate dealer, ended his life at the Cecil Hotel amidst personal turmoil and, quite frankly, financial wastefulness. He somehow managed to piss $40,000 down the drain, at that time, trying to forget his wife and son that he was estranged from. Unfortunately, spending all of that money did not help, and he ended up ending his own life. Percy's suicide, which was through a self-inflicted gunshot wound really reflected the hollowness of wealth without happiness, which is a very common theme for a lot of the tragedies that take place at this hotel, particularly after the Great Depression. But more importantly, this signaled a tragic and potentially the first recorded death of its kind at the Cecil Hotel. Percy's death in an ambulance en route to the hospital was the start of the first somber chapter to the hotel's very dark history. Dorothy Richardson, a 33-year-old from San Francisco, roamed the corridors of the Cecil Hotel for days, completely unnoticed until her distress became public. Collapsing in the hotel, Dorothy was rushed to the hospital after a failed attempt to take her own life following her husband's strange death. She thankfully managed to survive. I'm going to pivot now to what Los Angeles was like at this time. Quite frankly, Los Angeles was riding high on a wave of economic prosperity. The city was booming with new buildings, a growing film industry, and a very bullish stock market. In 1928, the city's towering City Hall was completed, and that stood as a testament to the growth and development and optimism of the future of Los Angeles. And amidst this backdrop, the Cecil Hotel was also thriving, and it was basking in Los Angeles' golden era. But all good things must come to an end, and all of this was about to come crashing down. And the Roaring Twenties would end up becoming a nightmare, kind of like the 20s that we're in today. On October 24th, 1929, a day that has gone down in history as Black Thursday, nearly 17 million shares of stocks were sold at bargain, bottom of the barrel pricing, which decimated a majority of investors. Each week that followed brought the U.S. economy from bad to worse to even worse, and the U.S. was flung into the Great Depression. By 1933, almost 7,000 banks went under. Industrial production decreased by almost 50%, and unemployment reached 25%. But whatever forces were at play here, we're like, nah. The Great Depression isn't enough. Fuck the United States right now. We are also going to throw a bunch of dust at them. And now I'm going to talk about the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. This was a period of severe dust storms that nearly destroyed completely agriculture in both the United States and Canadian prairies. This was a really sad event because it caused a lot of human displacement as families had to leave their farms that they spent years of their lives working on and travel to other areas of the United States to look for work. According to sources I've linked in the show notes, the Dust Bowl migration of the 1930s was the largest migration in American history, with over 300,000 displaced Americans moving to California. It goes without saying that these were obviously very trying times in the United States given both the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl, but this was a huge turning point for Skid Row, one of which it would never recover from. And while I think most, if not all of you are familiar with Skid Row, for those of you that aren't, it covers about 50 blocks east of downtown LA. Unfortunately, today it is known to have a really large homeless population, and unfortunately, there's also a lot of violence that goes along with that. But this is really what facilitated the turn for Skid Row. After 300,000 Americans moved to California following the Dust Bowl, the homeless population on Skid Row grew to over 10,000 individuals, and unfortunately, this meant that crime grew as well. Incidences of theft and pickpocketing grew, and many restaurants ended up converting into soup kitchens. While the Depression was over with by 1940, Skid Row is still suffering from the tragedy left in its wake today. The Cecil Hotel went from a 5-star destination to the equivalent of spending a night at the Stanley Hotel. For those of you that haven't seen The Shining, that is where that reference is from. Highly recommend you watch it. It's a Stanley Kubrick film. The hotel was quickly neglected in terms of care. Bedding, furnishings weren't replaced when needed, lighting would break, and it just would not get repaired. But that wasn't as detrimental to the downfall of the Cecil Hotel as the shift in its guests were. Following the Great Depression, the guests that began to check into the hotel weren't checking in for a place to stay. They were checking in to do whatever the fuck they want, and 99% of the time, those were illegal things. Guests often checked in to cheat on their spouses, buy, sell, and use drugs, and solicit sex workers. This culmination of occurrences led to bad circumstances and an uptick in police getting dispatched to the hotel on almost a daily basis. And it wasn't long until the alleged curse of the Cecil Hotel began. A 44-year-old man named Frank Everett Lindsay spent the night at the Cecil Hotel on September 9th of 1930. Frank was arrested in October for second-degree kidnapping of an 11-year-old named Pearl Grant. Frank was also a suspect in the murder of his wife. On January 21st, 1931, a 19-year-old man named Boyd Hanson struck Cecil resident Roy Smith outside of the hotel. Roy unfortunately passed away after the incident. In another incident, Louis Mauthausen struck and killed a 30-year-old resident of the hotel named Virginia Tallman. November 19th, 1931, was the day where hotel suicide saw its first death by suicide since the 1920s. 46-year-old W.K. Norton was discovered by a cleaning lady who had only been working at the hotel for a few months prior to this. After knocking on the door and getting no response, she assumed the room was empty and she let herself in. But when she let herself in, she found W.K. deceased on the bed. W.K. had checked into the hotel under the alias of James Wiley, but investigators were able to determine his true identity from the bank checks in his pocket. Additionally, poison capsules were found in his pockets, which allowed investigators to determine how he took his own life. Authorities got in contact with his wife, and she had informed them that he was suffering from mental health challenges due to the economy. What is absolutely wild to me is that somebody could just casually obtain poison capsules at this point in time. But I guess it's not that crazy, seeing as how doctors prescribed cocaine back in the day. What a time to be alive, I guess. A 53-year-old man and former Army medical sergeant named Louis D. Borden committed suicide in July of 1934. He cut his throat with a razor blade and left behind a note that he was suffering from medical issues. In 1937, a 25-year-old named Grace Magro died after jumping from her room onto the telephone pole wires below. She was staying with 26-year-old M.W. Madison, a sailor, who stated that he was asleep when Grace jumped and that he had no explanation to what could have prompted her to jump. No charges were ever brought against him. The following year, Roy Thompson, a 35-year-old Marine Corps firefighter, jumped from his room, which was room 1431, and landed on the skylight of the building next door. In January of 1940, 45-year-old Dorothy Steiger ingested poison during her stay at the hotel. She died the following day. Obviously, the hotel had seen a lot of tragedy, and the nosedive that the hotel was taking in quality, finances, and guests facilitated a change in ownership in 1941 when the Albert Group took over the hotel. The shift in ownership brought in hope that maybe this could be a new era for the hotel. The Albert family were very experienced in the hotel industry, and they had owned several successful chains across the Western United States. The group gave the hotel a facelift and made some other improvements, but that could not stop the hotel from continuing on to be the nightmarish hellscape that it was destined to be. To make matters worse, in an effort to attract more clientele, they began advertising insanely low rates of $1 daily, which was a cheaper rate than opening night over a decade ago. And then they offered $6 for an entire week. This is a classic example of you get what you pay for, because all this maneuver did was further perpetuate the very guests that they were trying to avoid. Just a quick heads up before I get to the first guest that I'm going to talk about. This is going to involve the murder of a newborn child, so listen to this with care. September of 1944, Dorothy Jean Purcell, a pregnant 19-year-old, woke up at night with severe pain. She was staying with her 38-year-old lover, which is just, I won't get into that, but that's gross. She went into the bathroom and gave birth to a baby boy that she claimed she was not aware that she was pregnant with. And then she further claimed that she thought was a stillborn. So, because Dorothy allegedly thought that this newborn was a stillborn, she decided to toss her newborn child out of the window instead of calling 911. An autopsy determined that the newborn boy had air in his lungs at the time of his death, and she was subsequently charged with murder. Dorothy was then acquitted when psychologists testified that Dorothy was temporarily insane at the time she killed her son. Elizabeth Betty Short, the woman who became known as the victim in the Black Dahlia murder that occurred on January 15th of 1947, was seen by police officer Merrill McBride having a drink at the Cecil Hotel bar on January 14th, one day prior to the murder. In November of 1947, 35-year-old Robert Smith died after he either fell or jumped from a window on the 7th floor. In February of 1950, a man named Ed Bauman lost his arm in an elevator accident at the hotel. On October 22nd of 1954, a woman who was staying in room 704 under the name Margaret Brown jumped from the window in her room to her death. On February 11th of 1962, 50-year-old Julia Moore jumped to her death from the window in her 8th floor room and landed on an interior light well on the 2nd floor. On October 12th of 1962, 27-year-old Pauline Otten, who was staying at the hotel with her husband Dewey, got into a heated argument with him later that evening. Dewey told Pauline that he was leaving for good, and he stormed out of their shared hotel room. Pauline then wrote a suicide note and jumped out of the window in her 9th room floor. Pauline landed on a 65-year-old pedestrian named George Giannini, and both of them were killed instantly. 65-year-old Delbert Lawrence jumped to his death from the 14th floor on April 12th of 1963. On June 4th of 1964, an employee of the hotel found a long-term resident, 69-year-old Pigeon Osgood, murdered in her room. Her murder, along with a previous murder in a hotel nearby, were linked, but remain unsolved today. 2 unidentified women in their early 20s jumped to their deaths from a window on the 12th floor on December 20th of 1975. On December 2nd, 1976, 26-year-old Jeffrey Paley fired over a dozen shots from his .22 caliber rifle from the roof of the Cecil Hotel into a local bank building. He was apprehended at the hotel. On September 1st of 1992, police discovered an unidentified man in the alley behind the hotel. Police were unable to determine if the man had jumped, fell, or was pushed to his death. On June 15th of 2015, police were called due to a body on the street outside of the hotel. The 28-year-old unidentified man had fallen to his death, but it was unclear whether it was suicide or murder. While there were numerous numerous incidences of the darkness that was seen at the Cecil Hotel, there were a select few cases that really drew the most attention to this hellscape. Ricardo Ramirez, the serial killer who was known as the Night Stalker, who was known to take the lives of 13 victims between April of 1984 to August of 1985, but he had also attempted several murders, committed many sexual assaults and burglaries, stayed at the Cecil Hotel on the top floor when he committed a lot of these crimes. There is a rumor that he was seen in the hotel after committing one of the murders, covered in blood, but this has not been officially confirmed, so I'm just going to deem that a rumor. While Ramirez was ultimately caught and subsequently died in prison, the 14th floor remained a plagued location of the hotel, with strange occurrences following the serial killer's stay. Even more bizarrely, the 14th floor became a location that believers in the occult would frequent to drink and revel in the floor's dark history. Like Ramirez, Austrian serial killer Johann Unterweger, who murdered individuals in Austria, West Germany, the United States, and Czechoslovakia, Unterweger stayed at the Cecil Hotel. When Unterweger left Vienna and arrived in Los Angeles, he intentionally went straight to the hotel for his stay because of its reputation and its former guest, Richard Ramirez. Another benefit for Unterweger was that the hotel was located in the heart of Skid Row, which was the most ideal location to solicit a sex worker. Similar to Ramirez, Unterweger also had a very bizarre following after he was apprehended, which drew many to the hotel to experience the place where these fucking pieces of shit stayed. Prior to Unterweger and Ramirez, there were a lot of rumors that surrounded the hotel in the decades prior. There were so many crimes, tragedies, suicides, and deaths that had plagued the hotel for decades. So it's obvious that many people thought that there was something more behind that. People thought there was a darker entity and a paranormal aspect to the hotel, which is what facilitated all of these really sad and tragic circumstances. This was further propelled with Richard Ramirez and Jack Unterweger. There was a case in 2013 that I really think, for whatever reason, people really clung on to anything but the actuality. So I think that this incident in 2013 really fueled these paranormal speculations for the hotel. As I had mentioned before, for quite some time, the hotel had not only a bad reputation, but a spooky one as well. Many believed, based on all of the dark events that surrounded the Cecil Hotel, that perhaps there were more sinister reasons behind all of the darkness that occurred inside of the hotel's walls. This theory was further solidified in 2013 following the death of Elisa Lam. I think that this is likely the most well-known death in the Cecil Hotel, unfortunately. But Elisa was a very bright, intelligent student at the University of British Columbia who decided to take a break to travel and was last seen on January 31st. And she was then reported missing by her parents on February 1st. On February 13th, security footage emerged of Elisa in the hotel elevator, and the video went viral due to the very strange behavior that she was exhibiting in the footage. In the video, it almost looks as though Elisa enters the elevator, pushes several buttons. She then pops her head out suddenly to look to the left and to the right. She then goes to hide in the corner of the elevator. At one point, she stands just outside of the door and does weird motions with her hands for several seconds, and then she's gone. On February 19th, a maintenance worker found Elisa deceased in one of the 4 1,000-gallon tanks on the roof that provided water to the rooms, a kitchen, and a coffee shop. Many rumors and theories emerged following the release of the video, and even more so after Elisa was found. But her parents had made it abundantly clear that Elisa struggled with bipolar disorder and depression. Not only that, but Elisa was known to not take her medications, and this had previously caused her to have hallucinations, which resulted in a hospitalization for one of her episodes. Nonetheless, this is a very sad and strange death that fueled the paranormal rumors. Over the years, ownership of the Cecil Hotel was passed around like a hot potato. Nobody wanted to be responsible for that hellscape. Way back in 1988, Streetwise Investments LLC purchased the hotel from Universal Foreclosure Services, which goes to show you how well it was doing financially. And throughout Skid Row, there were several programs that were enacted over the decades to try to mitigate crime, but none of them worked. And it's really because they didn't focus on the issue at hand. What I mean by that is, the programs that they enacted were programs like, hey, where can we place things that are really inconvenient to homeless people so that they aren't able to sleep? Let's put things on benches so that those that are displaced cannot sleep on the benches. Hey, let's ticket homeless people for loitering so they get ticketed for loitering and they don't even have income. So really, the programs that they enacted were meant to punish the people that were already homeless and didn't have anything, rather than an actual attempt to mitigate crime. The Cecil Hotel underwent a transformation in 2018 with a revamp, and 3 years later, it introduced a fresh new persona as Stay on Main, though it shared amenities and retained its original online presence. Fast forward to 2014, a New York hotelier scooped it up for $30 million, and soon after, a development firm clinched a 99-year lease with a commitment to preserve its significant architecture, but overhauling the dated interiors. Plans stalled due to the pandemic. While in 2017, it gained status as a historic monument, by 2021, the Cecil Hotel had pivoted to providing affordable housing. In 2022, the south side of the Cecil Hotel, which had long sported a painted room rate advertisement, was controversially whitewashed. This act, which erased the visible history dating back to at least 1927, sparked speculation and concern. Questions arose about who was responsible for the removal of the signage, now protected as a historic landmark. Reports surfaced of a commissioned mural by artist Matthew Garcia and future plans for The Frames, a billboard project by Simon Barron Development, hinting at a new visual era for the Cecil. But as of today, that's the story of the Cecil Hotel. It's not just a place to lay your head. It's where some left their souls instead. The Cecil isn't just a building, it's a symbol of Los Angeles' dark history and a collection of tales that remind us of its legacy. A patchwork of Los Angeles highs, lows, and darkness. If you liked what you heard today, please like, review, subscribe. You can catch all of my archived episodes, bonus episodes, early access to episodes on Patreon, fthatpod. Catch me on all social media as well at fthatpod, except for Instagram, which is fthat_pod, and the website is fthatpod.com.